Mr. Speaker, the relationship between the US and the UK is one of our foremost relationships, and I have confidence in the Ambassador in the role that he is doing.
That was Prime Minister's questions on Wednesday, with Keir Starmer defending Peter Mandelson, the UK's ambassador to the US. By Thursday, we heard this from the Foreign Office Minister, Stephen Doherty.
The emails show, Mr. Speaker, that the depth and extent of Lord Mandelson's relationship with Jeffrey Epstein is materially different from that known at the time of his appointment.
Well, those emails published by Bloomberg are deeply revealing of Mandelson's relationship with convicted paedophile Jeffrey Epstein. Today, we're bringing you the inside story of that scoop and asking what it means for Keir Starmer and the Labour government. You're listening to Bloomberg UK Politics. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Now, this story starts with some 18,000 emails from Jeffrey Epstein's personal Yahoo account, which were seen by Bloomberg, including many exchanges with Peter Mandelson, who was at the time the EU's Trade Commissioner and was, until yesterday, the UK's ambassador to the United States. The messages show a close personal relationship with the disgraced financier and exchanges at key moments in the months before he was imprisoned in mid-2008. They provoked a chain of events which led to Mandelson's removal from his position at a key moment, just days from Donald Trump's visit to the UK.
Well, if you recall, Stephen, Peter Mandelson was appointed as Britain's ambassador to Washington in February. His ties to Epstein were known then, but Lord Mandelson had previously denied that they were extensive. Now Keir Starmer and his advisers face questions about why Mandelson, the spin doctor, former minister, key figure in Tony Blair's administration, was chosen for this most important of diplomatic roles. The details of Mandelson's support for Epstein, writing to him after his conviction, it just could not happen in Britain, seemed to be a tipping point. Now, we've had criticism from the Conservative Party leader Kemi Badenoch and this Friday from Nigel Farage, talking about a serious misjudgment from the Prime Minister and how Morgan McSweeney, the Prime Minister's right-hand man, and his role now being considerably in doubt, according to the Reform UK's leader.
Well, this story was a political bombshell in Westminster, so we wanted to talk more about how it came about. For that, we're joined by our finance reporter Harry Wilson, who reported on those emails, and by our political correspondent Ellen Milligan as well. Harry, I wanted to start with you, and I suppose how this story got started, and I suppose what you thought when you first saw the contents of these emails.
Yeah, I mean, I still remember looking at that email. I mean, it was among the first that I found, and it was really just, as soon as you read it, it was just, I kind of thought, if you've been a Hollywood scriptwriter, imagining like what someone might say inadvisedly to a convicted pedophile just before they go to jail, I don't think you'd have come up with words quite as dramatic as what Lord Mandelson had sent. And it was just, I think, the overwhelming sense of the closeness between the two of them, that, this was more than just an association, as I think Lord Mandelson has described it in recent days and weeks. It was more, this was seemed like a deeply personal friendship the two of them had.
What were the sentences and words that stood out for you? I mean, this is a huge volume of emails that you went through. You also sent, a long request for comment to Peter Mandelson regarding this cache of emails and what the contents of it was. What stood out to you also as you kind of waded through them all?
Well, I suppose one thing to say is, I mean, this was a massive team effort. So there was a whole bunch of us who've been working on this, and I think, to be honest, amongst all of us, just as we went through the emails, we got this kind of sense of, I guess, it's how you might describe it as some kind of quasi-lobbying campaign that Lord Mandelson had been on for Epstein in the months before he went to jail. It's kind of like you sort of imagine, if you had a friend in peril and he's there sort of almost every week checking in with Epstein, making sure he's okay, trying to kind of find ways of putting him potentially in touch with people who might be able to help him. It's more than just, I guess, a sense of being a moral support. It's a sense that there's an active level of support there. And I think that's what really kind of, I guess, surprised us. And then when you see what he actually sends just the day before Epstein actually goes to jail. It's really the culmination of a whole sort of months-long, I guess even years-long thing in which Mandelson has been all the way through this kind of support for Epstein to an extraordinary degree.
Of course, that expression, I think the world of you, in that email, as you say, the day before Jeffrey Epstein went to jail, certainly stands out. Talk to us about the exchanges that you and the team had with Peter Mandelson before this story was published.
So the first he learned of our story would have been on Monday afternoon. We sent an email to him at 3:36 in the afternoon on Monday. It was a very long email. It was nearly 2,000 words long. It contained all the emails that we were planning to report in full, with the dates of when they were sent. We explained to him which email account the emails had been sent from and to. And we then listed about 20 questions to him, just setting out all the sort of different things that we felt the emails raised as issues with him, and asking him for comment. And at that point, we had planned, there was a lot of stuff there. And in fairness to him, we felt that he should have a decent amount of time to respond. So we gave him till essentially the end of the week to come back to us. But then I guess sort of events kind of moving pretty fast. You had the US Congressional Committee come out on later that day with the birthday book. And in there was this 10-page, I guess, how would you describe it? Glowing tribute that Mandelson gave to Epstein in 2003 for this extraordinary birthday book. And that really sort of then, from there, the sort of pressure started growing on Mandelson. And I think at that point, we were starting to think to ourselves, we are being overtaken by events here. And particularly then on Tuesday, there was this growing chorus, I think, around Lord Mandelson in his role as ambassador. Was it viable? So we decided then to bring forward actually our deadline for his response to the next day. And then Wednesday morning was suddenly out of the blue came this interview that Lord Mandelson gave to the Sun, in which he started talking about, obviously, the birthday book, saying how much he deeply regretted his association with Epstein. But then, and obviously to us, this really stood out when he started saying, hinting at further revelations to come, which to our minds certainly suggested that he was obviously aware of what we'd sent. And it was that point we decided to directly go to him on WhatsApp, because at this point we still had not received any recognition from him that he'd received anything that we'd sent to him. And so we messaged him, and then it I guess that sort of things sort of started spiraling really from there, and we ended up obviously publishing later that day.
At this point, I'd like to bring in our political correspondent, Ellen Milligan, to think about this revelation. I mean, these were letters and support, this relationship between Mandelson and Epstein around the time of his conviction for soliciting sex from a minor. This is the issue for Keir Starmer now, isn't it, Ellen? How damaging do you think this is for the Prime Minister around his judgment? That's the question that politicians and others in the country are seeming to put to the Prime Minister now.
Yeah, it's deeply damaging, and the Prime Minister has suffered other resignations during his 1 or so years in office, including his Deputy Prime Minister over a tax issue recently. But the sacking of Peter Mandelson is uniquely humiliating because it was entirely predictable. I mean, this is a politician who had to resign twice from Tony Blair's government for his murky relationships with wealthy businessmen. He's a politician whose friendship with Epstein, including since his 2008 conviction, was public knowledge. It was raised in the vetting process, we report today, when he was made ambassador. The Prime Minister was warned about this. He was asked about it by the Financial Times on the week of his appointment, to which Mandelson told the FT to F off. All these questions have been swirling around Peter Mandelson for years. And what Harry's reporting did was kind of shine shine new light on the depth of the relationship, but much of it was known. And so, yes, there are questions being raised now about the Prime Minister's judgment, about his Chief of Staff, Morgan McSweeney's judgment, who we've reported was a big advocate for Mandelson getting this role. It raises questions about the vetting process and also questions about the government's own reasoning for sacking Mandelson. I mean, in their statement, they say that the emails that Harry published show a new depth and extent to the relationship. In particular, the Peter Mandelson suggestion that Epstein's first conviction was wrong. And I was in the briefing with the Prime Minister's spokesperson yesterday, and we were putting to him, that sounds like you were comfortable with them having a friendship as long as he thought Epstein was guilty of the crimes. But now, because there's evidence that he thought he was innocent, that's the thing that's moved the dial. So lots of questions being raised around the judgment of the Prime Minister now.
Ellen, I just want to ask you, when you were looking at the details of this reporting, was it immediately clear in Westminster from the conversations that you were having that Mandelson would have to go?
Yeah, I mean, as Harry was saying, there was this late Monday dump from the US Congress committee of the birthday tribute to Epstein, which allegedly also included a note from Donald Trump, but also included this 10-page tribute from Mandelson, where he called him his best pal. There were kind of language yum yum being used in there. I mean, it was deeply uncomfortable to read. And I think the moment that me and the rest of the reporters in Westminster, but also the government, realised that this was at risk was that publication, and there was a big Daily Mail splash on the Tuesday saying his job was at risk. The Times then reported that Mandelson had tried to lobby for Tony Blair to get a meeting with Epstein at the time when he was Prime Minister. Prime Minister Keir Starmer was then absolutely almost, humiliated at Prime Minister's questions, really for the first time, by Kemi Badenoch, or he just simply couldn't answer her questions and continued to stand by him. And then this amazing story with all the emails from Harry and the team really was the nail in the coffin of his career. And the next morning, Yvette Cooper, the Foreign Secretary, and the Prime Minister Keir Starmer at 10 a.m. had a meeting in Downing Street where they literally sat through the Bloomberg story and the emails that were published, and realised within 40 minutes that he had to go and he was sacked.
Wow. Okay. So in terms of, Harry, what you think happens next, in your view, on the pressure on the government, which in a few days' time is going to be hosting US President Donald Trump and a number of US business executives for a state visit that is both ceremonial with the royal family, but is also, very political. There's that. So I'm interested to understand your view on where this might go next, but also to mention another angle to this story. As you say, you rightly credited the team effort that it required to bring this all to light, but it also reveals a great deal about Ghislaine Maxwell and Maxwell's relationship to Epstein.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously a lot here beyond just Mandelson. Her account has been that by 2003 she'd largely cut ties with Epstein, and sure, they sort of stayed in contact, sporadically, but basically they were sort of entirely separate entities by that point, and she was off on a completely different track and a different life. What we've shown is that actually she remained very much a part of his world after 2003, particularly around the time again of his conviction. You can see that Epstein was even going to her with the wording of what he should plead guilty to, and having this discussion, her sort of matter-of-factly coming back saying, I think you should plead guilty to, lewd and lascivious behaviour. I mean, it's quite extraordinary. Even seeming discussions about pregnancy. I mean, it's an extraordinary kind of, I guess, a window into what looked to have been a very close and continuing relationship. As for, I guess, coming back to the UK, what all this means. I mean, it can only be deeply uncomfortable for the government having Trump in town and having Epstein as a top news agenda item in the UK. Obviously, in the States, Epstein is a huge raw nerve for the Trump administration, and it will be, I can only imagine, a matter of deep concern to the government that Trump is coming to town with Epstein as a hot topic in the UK. And particularly, obviously, any discussion around the birthday book. Trump's line seems to be that, this is a hoax, and obviously to then have fired the British ambassador, at least in part because of, I guess, his appearance in the birthday book, or at least that sort of set in train some of the events that we've just been talking about. I can only imagine that is, again, deeply uncomfortable for the British government to have that as a topic when Trump is so viscerally against the idea that there is any veracity in that document.
And just briefly, Ellen, on that point, you're going to be covering that visit as well. What should we expect from how the British government are going to play this?
It's so deeply uncomfortable because the state visit, you'll hear from the king, you'll hear from the president, the prime minister, all about the bonds that the two countries have, the shared commonalities, and the big bond that really ties the two administrations. That they're not going to want to talk about is Jeffrey Epstein. I mean, not only has the prime minister just sacked his ambassador to the US. You've got Trump being asked questions about his own ties, but the state visit's being hosted by Prince Andrew's brother, who is also, implicated in the scandal surrounding Jeffrey Epstein. So it's deeply uncomfortable. No one's going to want to talk about it, but they will be asked about it at the press conference. I would be shocked if they don't. It's one of the biggest scandals engulfing both the British and the US governments at the moment. I think this would have been more damaging if Peter Mandelson had stayed in place, because there just would be more questions and there would be more choreography trying to avoid Trump being in a picture with Peter Mandelson, laughing, for example, together at the state banquet. I'm sure the US administration would have not wanted that. But still, there are massive questions about the Prime Minister's judgment. And also, we've reported today that government officials now worry that by sacking Mandelson, the implication is that the Prime Minister doesn't think that those who have close ties with Epstein are fit for high office. How does that extend to his opinion of Trump's connections with Epstein? And I'm sure that will be the question that's put to him at the press conference.
Indeed. Ellen, we'll await your reporting then on what does happen at that state visit. That is our political correspondent, Ellen Milligan. And in our studio, our finance reporter, Harry Wilson, reporting on those emails revealing that relationship between Peter Mandelson and the late Jeffrey Epstein.
And you can read more of those stories, Epstein's inbox on the Bloomberg website, on Bloomberg.com, and the terminal as well, and more on the story behind the story of Mandelson's Epstein emails. You find both of those stories on the Bloomberg website. Well, we're going to turn to something completely different now. We have a special and unusual guest in studio. Yuan Potts is with us. Hello, Yuan.
Hello, guys.
Very, very different conversation we're going to be having now. Usually, we only get the three of us together when something momentous is happening, and by that I mean usually a budget is what brings the three of us together on this podcast at the same time. But we're actually talking to you today because this is our last UK politics podcast. More on what's coming next in just a moment. But we wanted to take a minute to talk about our highlights from more than 1,000 episodes of this show. Caroline, you've been doing them from the very start. I am the late arrival to this ensemble piece that we are now involved in. But we want to just take a minute to think about, I suppose, some of the things that we've talked about over the years on this programme, all of the people we've spoken to. Yuan, you're being billed as our special guest, so you go first. What stands out for you?
Yeah, I've been casting my mind back to the early days of the show when it was called Bloomberg Westminster.
Yes.
And you remember back in the early days, we always booked an MP to come on the show every single day. And I really enjoyed those days of kind of dreaming up questions to grill MPs, trying to get at something, get a bit of information out of them, trying to get them to say something that perhaps they didn't want to say on air. But frankly, that's quite difficult because a lot of politicians, as we know, are very adept at not answering the question. And I think some of the most enlightening conversations we've had on the show have been with people who've taken a step back from politics, people who've retired, perhaps the likes of Michelle Barnier, Vince Cable. And remember, Caroline, the conversation we had with Neil Kinnock.
Yes.
With Lord Kinnock. Just so sharp at the age of 83. He was really crystal clear, totally up to speed with all the latest political thinking, the latest news. Really, really interesting conversations.
Yeah. 8 years, a little bit over, of political conversations. I mean, you and I, we've covered Theresa May's administration, Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, brief, eventful. Rishi Sunak, now Keir Starmer. I mean, and interviewed Nigel Farage, of course, only earlier this year. A lot of people think he may well be the next Prime Minister. Yes, it's been lots of fun, really fascinating. All of the chairs of the different select committees, I think, have been interesting too. And I think, Stephen, and what we wanted to bring you on board for when you also started presenting the programme is to try to talk about politics in the UK with that kind of business, that policy angle that is something that we think about a lot at Bloomberg. I mean, MPs and think tanks and policy wonks, don't always think as much about the bond markets as we do. But of course, that debt story is now massively important, isn't it?
Well, I mean, look, it's become the central part of the conversation for this government as well as for the past several governments as well, as how difficult those decisions are. And the more that we know about the fiscal state of the country helps to inform why some of the decisions coming down the line are coming from politicians. I mean, I have to say, some of my favourite parts during this programme has been interrupting Yuan when he's trying to make a serious point, which I'd like to think honed into a fine art by the end. Especially that time when he said fiscal drag, and I said it was my least favourite kind of drag, and which I think he appreciates.
For anyone who doesn't get that, that's a real economists and political joke, isn't it? That's Well,
exactly, and me always bringing it down to the lowest common denominator. You did mention Michel Barnier, though. That conversation sticks with me, certainly because we asked him what he was going to do next. He'd come to talk to us about his book about negotiating the Brexit deal. We asked him what he was going to do next, and he just said, I'd like to serve my country. Little did we know he'd end up being French Prime Minister a couple of months later. Also great to feature some of the conversations around what was happening in Northern Ireland during that 2-year suspension of the Northern Irish Assembly as well. It's not a story that often gets a lot of attention in Westminster, so the chance to speak to politicians from all of the different parties about their perspectives on the situation there was something that I think I'll really remember as well.
Absolutely, talking about, the political issues, which sometimes are spectacle, but we like to talk about them as they deliver for outcomes in terms of voters and the policy for the country. It's been hugely enjoyable. I want to thank you, Yuan, for co-anchoring the programme with me for so long, and also to you, Stephen.
Well, that is it for Bloomberg UK Politics, a show that we've loved bringing you over the past few years. But don't go anywhere, because you'll still be able to get your fix of political news and analysis from Bloomberg right here in this feed. In just a couple of weeks, our colleagues Alva Ray and Alex Wickham will launch Bloomberg's brand new podcast, Political Dividends. They'll take you inside Westminster, from who's up and who's down to what it all really means and how money and politics collide to shape power in Parliament. So Political Dividends with Alex and Alva, coming soon.
But from us and from the whole team, a huge thank you to our producers, past and present, James Wilcock, Tiwa Adebayo and Freddie Fulston, and our executive producer, Chris Pitt, our audio engineer, Andrew Gavin. And thanks to you for listening. This is Bloomberg.